Chicago and Atlanta are both iconic American cities, and in today's video, I'm going to compare living in Chicago to living in Atlanta. So let's get started. Number one, size. First things first, Chicago and Atlanta are both big cities. But did you know that Chicago is bigger than Atlanta? It sure is. The populations in the metro areas are somewhat comparable, with about 6 million people living in metro Atlanta and 9 million people living in metro Chicago, with metro Atlanta covering a little over 8,000 square miles and metro Chicago covering about 9,500 square miles. But when it comes to the actual city, only about 500,000 people live in the Atlanta city limits, compared to over 2 million people in the Chicago city limits. Atlanta is 136 square miles compared to Chicago's 228 square miles, giving Atlanta a population density that is far less than that of Chicago. By population within city limits, Chicago is the third largest in the nation, while Atlanta is way down the list at number 38, right above Colorado Springs, Colorado. When it comes to metro area rankings, Chicago is still third largest in the US, but Atlanta jumps way up the list to the 8th largest metro area, just above Miami. Both cities are large, but Chicago is larger than Atlanta any way you measure. Number two, weather. If you really want to avoid hot summers, you won't want to call either city home. Atlanta is known for its hot, humid summers. Often in the summer here, you can walk outside and the air is so thick with humidity, it almost feels like you could cut the air with a knife. Chicago also has its share of hot summer days, and both cities have their share of days with temperatures in the high 80s and 90s. A few times during the summer, Atlanta will usually get to the very low hundreds. Talk about hot. Winter is where there is a more noticeable difference in weather. Chicago is in the Midwest and therefore gets snow, lots of snow. Chicago averages 36 inches of snow in the winter and has plenty of days with highs in the 20s or teens and lows below zero. In comparison, we didn't get any snow in Atlanta last winter. Some years we get none, and other years we may get an inch or two. 3 inches here is considered a big snowfall, and the city will shut down if snow is even just predicted. I know you're laughing or rolling your eyes at the thought if you are from Chicago or elsewhere that has snowy winters, but our snow tends to be accompanied by ice, and well, we're just not that used to snow down here. Winter temps are also much more mild in Atlanta, and our average high temperature in January is in the low 50s compared to the low 30s in Chicago. If you are trying to get away from the cold or snow, you will likely love Atlanta winters. And I will say, working with clients that have moved from Chicago, one of their biggest reasons for why they moved here to Atlanta was because of the cold winters in Chicago. Number three, traffic and public transportation. In Atlanta, owning a car is pretty much a necessity. Life is certainly much more challenging if you don't own a car or have access to a car. Our public transportation system is just not very robust, even in the heart of Atlanta. Atlanta also isn't very walkable. Most people need to drive to get to their job, to the grocery store, to sports or entertainment venues, to restaurants. Pretty much anywhere you want to go, you'll have to drive your car at least part of the way there. And in a best case scenario, can hop on a MARTA train or bus to go the rest of the way. Chicago, on the other hand, has a large and robust public transit system, and many of its neighborhoods are very walkable. Parking in downtown Chicago can also be expensive and hard to find. In Atlanta, you will almost certainly need a car. In Chicago, whether or not you need a car really depends on how walkable your neighborhood is and if you can reach your job by walking or public transit. Many residents choose to own a car and others get along just fine without one. Number four, cost of living. According to finance website NerdWallet, the cost of living in Chicago is about 20% higher than the cost of living here in Atlanta. The biggest difference is housing costs in Chicago. It averages a whopping 43% more than in Atlanta. NerdWallet listed the median rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in Metro Atlanta at about $1,400 compared to $2,700 for Metro Chicago. And the median home price for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home was about $100,000 more in Metro Chicago. Housing will almost certainly take up more of your budget in Chicago than in Atlanta. Transportation costs run about 20% more expensive in Chicago, and gas tends to be more expensive there. I just looked, and the average cost of a gallon of gas in Chicago is $4.20 compared to $3.46 in Atlanta. That adds up to an 18-gallon tank of gas being $13 cheaper here in Atlanta at those prices. Per finance website Wallet Hub, car insurance is actually more expensive on average here in Georgia. An average 45-year-old would pay about $870 a year compared to only $592 in Illinois. Number 5, diversity. Both Chicago and Atlanta are diverse cities. Per the 2020 census in 2020, Chicago was 45% white, 29% black, 7% Asian, and 28% Hispanic. Atlanta was 41% white and 48% black, and 5% Asian and 5% Hispanic. You can easily find cuisine from around the world in both cities, but the diversity is a bit different in each city. Atlanta is known as the Black Mecca and has the second largest black population in the country, New York being the largest, and there's so much rich history and culture here. There is rich civil rights history, music history, and more that has taken place in Atlanta. Chicago has a history of waves of European immigrants during the late 1800s and early 1900s, and you can see that today in some of its various neighborhoods like Little Italy, Germantown, Polish Village, Little India, and a lot more. Today, most of these neighborhoods are home to a mix of nationalities, but their roots remain in the forms of restaurants, shops, and history museums. Number 6, sports. Last but not least, both cities are huge sports cities. Chicago has more pro sports teams than Atlanta, and Atlanta has one MLB team, the Atlanta Braves, compared to Chicago's 2, which are the Chicago White Sox and Chicago Cubs. Both cities have NFL teams, NBA teams, WNBA, MLS teams, and unlike Atlanta, Chicago also has an NHL team. But for you diehard hockey fans who can't imagine life without hockey, don't worry, because Atlanta might not have an NHL team anymore, but we do have an ECHL team out in the suburbs. This minor league team is just as much entertaining as the professional team, in my opinion. Both cities love their sports teams and have a strong sports culture. One other difference is the popularity of college football here in Atlanta. There are a few other things you may want to keep in mind. Atlanta is obviously much closer to the ocean, and you can reach a beach in only about 4 to 6 hours depending which one you choose to visit. On the other hand, Chicago is situated on the shores of Lake Michigan, which puts multiple lake beaches within easy driving distance. Here in Atlanta, Lake Lanier is only about an hour from the city, but it pales in comparison to Lake Michigan in terms of size. Atlanta is the winner when it comes to proximity to the mountains. If you are an avid hiker or just like spending time outdoors, you can get to the Appalachian Mountains up in North Georgia in about 1.5 to 2 hour drive from the city. Chicago, on the other hand, will take 8+ hours of driving to hit a mountain range, the Great Smoky Mountains, which are the closest to the city. Both cities have international airports, which makes air travel to anywhere in the world as easy as it gets. Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport is the busiest in the country, with Chicago's O'Hare Airport not far behind at the 4th busiest. Both cities also have excellent healthcare options, and as well as both private and public universities either in the city or a short drive away. For years, Atlanta has attracted people from all over the US, including from Chicago. Maybe you live in or near Chicago right now and are trying to decide if you want to call Atlanta your next home. Or maybe you want to move somewhere new, and Chicago and Atlanta are both on your list of possibilities. No matter what your situation, I hope you found this video helpful. Either way, I would love to hear from you. So if you want to call, text, or email me if you have questions about living in Atlanta or ready to make Atlanta your home, feel free to reach out. I've also done videos comparing Atlanta living to life in Los Angeles, New York City, as well as Seattle. So be sure to check those out, and don't forget to subscribe, and catch you on the next video.